In this video, I'm going to show you how to create discrete control room and headphone mixes in Reaper. So our project setup here, and I want to record some basic tracks. We have some drums with a kick, snare, overheads, and rooms, all being sent to a drum reverb, along with a bass and 2 guitars. And I already set up the inputs, so if I go into record, let's open up the mixer so we can see this better. And if we get the band to play, we can see we already have the sounds set up, and I created a rough mix. And each of our tracks have some effects on them, like compressors or EQs, and I'm happy with the rough mix I created. But I want to create a discrete headphone mix so the talent can hear their performance. And by discrete, I mean my mix could be completely different from theirs. So I'm going to start off by duplicating the tracks. This way I have my own tracks for the control room, and they have their own tracks for the headphone mix. So I'm going to select all the tracks, right-click, and choose Duplicate Tracks. And now we have 2 tracks for every input we're using. 2 kicks, 2 snares, and so on. Now the duplicated tracks don't need to be in record. So you can take them out like this. As all the tracks are selected, hitting record takes them all out of record at the same time. Now I want to remove the effects on these tracks, those compressors and EQs. If you want separate effects for the headphone mix and the control room mix, you could treat them differently. But in most situations, you wouldn't. You would just apply all the compression and EQ on the main mix to the headphone mix. And that's what we're going to do in this video. So let's delete all the effects, Alt on the PC, Option on the Mac, to remove those effects on just the duplicated tracks, or the ones selected. Now we also don't want to hear both tracks in the control room. So to take them out of the master pair and send, we can use this shortcut. Go over here to the routing button. Notice the 2 stripes, a greenish and a yellow. If I hold Alt on the PC, Option on the Mac, and click it, it removes that first stripe, taking these tracks out of the master pair and send, which we can see if I click the routing button, it's not in the master pair and send. If we hit it again, it puts it back in the master pair and send. So let's take it out again. And now these tracks are not going to be heard in the control room. We're just going to send those to the headphone mix, which will be separate outputs on our audio interface. So now let's move the tracks below the other ones. Again, they're all selected. So if we drag it down to the bottom, right down here, the headphone tracks are below the control room tracks. Scroll back up. Now we want to go into the routing matrix. Go to View and choose the routing matrix. Or we can use the keyboard shortcut. On PC, it's Alt-R, and on Mac, it's Option-R. Choose it, and it opens up the routing matrix. We can see the routing in our entire project. Here's our tracks. Here's the output to those tracks, where we could set up routing from one track to another. But first, let's send all the headphone tracks down here to the headphone output, which is right over here. For me, it's output 3 and 4 on my audio interface. Might be different for you. But before we set this up, let's go to our Preferences, Options, Preferences, and go to the tab for Track Send Defaults. Make sure it's set up to be full volume going out, 0 dB, and post fader, post pan. So when we send our tracks or our faders to the headphones, it's going to respect our fader. In other words, our mix. This is where it's set by default, but just make sure it's set this way for this. Hit OK. Now we could go to the headphone tracks and go over here to the headphone output and just drag to create sends like this. straight down, and we can see if we right-click any one of them, their full volume out, 0 dB, and their post-fader, post-pan. And that's for all of the headphone tracks. So our headphone tracks are going out the headphone output, while our main tracks or our control room tracks are going out the master parent send, which for me, right here, is output 1 and 2, where my speakers are plugged into. So we have separate faders, which we can create separate mixes with for our control room and our headphones. But now we need to send from the main tracks to our headphone tracks. So we can duplicate this sound from one track to another. And we can do that by creating sends over here. But before we do that, let's go back to the preferences and change it from post fader to pre-fader post effects. So the effects on the tracks will get sent to the headphone tracks, but not the volume, as we're creating new volumes or a new mix with the new faders. Now, if we wanted separate effects on each group of tracks, we could choose this option, which is pre-effects and pre-fader. But we want the effects on the main tracks to go to the headphone tracks. So we'll choose this option. And now we can create sends from our main tracks to the headphone tracks. If we go to our kick right here, we could send it from this kick track to this kick track. Just click right here, do the same for our snare. In fact, we can just drag in a diagonal like this to create those sends. So our kick is going to the kick, snare is going to the snare, and so on. So now we can close the routing matrix, and now we're seeing all our tracks at the same time. If I scroll over, here are the headphone tracks, and here are the control room tracks. But to make this easier, we can make it so we only see one mix at a time. And we can do that with screen sets. But let's first open the track manager, go to View, Track Manager, which you could also use the keyboard shortcut Shift-Control-M on the PC or Shift-Command-M on the Mac to open up the track manager. And then we're going to hide the headphone tracks from the track control panel like this and the mixer. So now we're only seeing our main tracks or the control room tracks right now. Let's close this. Let's open up our screen sets. Go to View, go down here to Screen Sets. You use the keyboard shortcut Control-E on the PC or Command-E on the Mac. Choose it. That opens up the Screen Sets window. Make sure we choose the track views, and let's set up our first screen set. Choose this one and save it. Make sure we choose these two options. We don't really need these three. For our track control panel and our mixer status, which is the track height and which tracks we see. So we'll name this control room, as we're only seeing those tracks. Save it. And now let's hide the other tracks. Go to our track manager. Let's hide these and only see the headphone tracks on the track control panel and the mixer. So now we'll save this as a screen set as well. Open the screen sets. We'll go to the second one, save it. Make sure we choose these two options and name it Headphone Mix. And now we have two screen sets we can use to view our control room or the headphone mix without seeing the other faders. And we can recall it with the load key. I have it set up to the keys 1 and 2. You can change that over here to whatever keyboard shortcuts you prefer. By default, I believe it's set up for the function keys, but we're using 1 and 2. So we could close this, and if we type in 1, we're just seeing our control room tracks. But we could adjust our mix. And that's not going to affect the headphone mix, as we can see over here. Of course, to hear the headphone mix in the control room, we need to change the routing. Let's go back to the routing matrix, take it out of the master parent send, and put these tracks in instead. Now we're hearing the headphone mix and not the control room mix, so we could hear what they're hearing. So we're not going to hear this mix as we're just hearing this mix. Because they're completely separate. And we can view them back and forth just by switching the screen sets. Now we're seeing the headphone mix. Now we're seeing the control room mix. And we can decide what we're hearing in the control room by adjusting it here. Now we're hearing the headphone mix. And now we're hearing the control room mix. Readjust the headphone mix, and we're not going to hear it in the control room, but they'll hear it in the headphones. But there's two problems with this method. If we go back to the control room, if we solo our tracks, let's solo the drums, that's going to affect the headphones as well. We're still seeing the drums, but not the bass and guitars. Because soloing them in the control room mix will prevent them from sending to the headphone mix. But we could use the solo defeat feature to get around that. Let's select all the tracks in the headphone mix, right-click the solo button, and choose Solo Defeat. And now, our headphone mix won't be affected by soloing our control room mix. So if we switch it so we can hear the headphone mix, right in here, we'll still be hearing the entire headphone mix. Even though in the control room, we're soloing the bass. So the soloing isn't affected if we use Solo Defeat. So that solves soloing. But the other problem is muting. If we go back to the control room mix, and let's mute the drums, we're not going to hear the drums in either mix. Check the headphone mix. The drums are not being sent from the control room mix to the headphone mix. The sends are also being muted. But we could change that with a preference. Let's go back to our preferences. Let's go to the Mute Solo tab and turn on this option. Pre-fader sends survive their track being muted, which is what we're doing right now. We're sending pre-fader and we're muting that track. So now, with this option turned on, and our drums being muted, they're still going to go to our headphone mix. So if we mute or unmute tracks from our control room mix, it's not going to affect the headphone mix, which is what we're hearing right now. So now, both our mixes are completely discrete, where if we adjust one, it doesn't affect the others. At any point, we can monitor each mix using the routing matrix and master parent sends. So we can always hear or monitor what each mix is doing and still be able to solo and mute our tracks. So that's pretty much it. That's how to create discrete control room and headphone mixes in Reaper. I hope you learned something, hope you could use it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.
Bingo, boys, let's go.